everyone, welcome back. I'm Melissa Pineda, and today I will be discussing the book On the Nature of Things by Lucretius. Lucretius lived 99 to 55 BC. He was a Roman poet and philosopher, and little is known about his life actually. This is the only known work of his. He was greatly influenced by Virgil, and you may not have heard of Virgil, but you've definitely heard of someone else that was greatly influenced by Virgil. So Lucretius greatly influenced Virgil. Virgil greatly influenced Dante from the Inferno, so the Divine Comedy. I will be reviewing that in the near future. I've already read it. It's very interesting. But yes, so there's so many connections here, and that's kind of how I pick my books too, just as an aside. It's like someone will mention Virgil. Okay, I have to read something from Virgil. And yeah, so in this case, Virgil was greatly influenced by Lucretius. So Lucretius died at the age of 44. He went insane, apparently, and he wrote several books throughout his bouts of insanity, which apparently Cicero afterwards corrected. There's like little known about Lucretius, and not much is mentioned. Like, there are no details. I've searched online. There are no details apart from Cicero corrected some of his works. And he killed himself at the age of 44. So that was Lucretius. On the Nature of Things was actually lost over time and was rediscovered in 1417 in a monastery in Germany, which is pretty incredible. So we have this work. It's a detailed account of ancient thought-provoking debates, essentially, that are still relevant today. So On the Nature of Things is Lucretius's only known work. And in this book, he tries to explain Epicurean philosophy. So it's a system of Greek philosophy, and he's trying to explain this to the Romans. So it is addressed to Gaius Memmius, a politician and a poet at his time, during his lifetime. And so basically Lucretius puts forward an argument for atomism as being responsible for the happenings of the world and not gods, which was the popular belief at that time. And it's the atoms and the voids that were responsible for the creation of the world and everything in it, and not the gods. So as always, I'm just going to provide some information that I found relevant and interesting while reading this work. And then if you find these things interesting as well, then by all means, I encourage you to pick yourself up a copy of this classic text. So Lucretius talks about the fact that nothing comes from nothing. This is what he says: nothing comes from nothing. He poses different questions throughout the book. What do the soul and the nature of the mind consist of? He says that nothing can disintegrate entirely into nothing. He says that terror and darkness of the mind must be dispelled by the aspect of nature, and nothing is ever gotten out of nothing with divine power. People believe there is a divine power at work, he says, but this is not actually the case. Things are done without the hands of the gods. And this would have been very controversial at this time because the idea then, Roman paganism, you have various gods for various different things in your life, and you pay tribute to these various gods. So the fact that he's saying that the hands of the gods don't have anything to do with the happenings of the world is a pretty bold statement, to say the least. He says that nature works by unseen bodies, and that the nature of the world has not been made for us by divine power, so great are its defects. So he says that out of nothing comes rebirth. So the idea that out of nothing comes rebirth is absolute nonsense. He says this. There's substance and void. So this is where his main argument is the atoms and the voids. So there's substance and then there's void. Lucretius says that the nature of the world cannot be a product of God's devising. He says that he doesn't know a lot about atoms, but from what he has seen of heaven's ways, this is the case. He says that matter and space are equally infinite, so they never end, impossible to measure, and everything lives sort of in like symbiotically on a seesaw. So all the atoms are always moving. There's no bottom to the universe where particles can rest, and the universe is limitless. And he also says that free will rested from fate. So we go wherever our pleasures take us. Our purpose directs us, he said. Each man's will initiates action. Lucretius says that the past was better, which is just funny because I feel like this is sort of a constant throughout history. People are always looking back on fonder times, easier times. So he says the same, that the past was better. Our fathers had it better than us, had an easier and better life, he said. All things waste away, and the earth itself is wasting away just like our bodies. He said he like thinks a lot of the Greeks. And he makes this very clear throughout that the Romans can learn a lot from Greek ways and from Greek history. And he suggests to Romans that they should try to follow Greek examples in many ways, this being one of them in this philosophy. Lucretius makes a lot of comments about human nature and man and just things that he thought that are still very relevant to today, like things that we either still say or still speculate on. So, for instance, when a man stands in danger or in doubt, that's when you know what kind of man he really is. Lucretius also says that this is a funny one. When a baby looks like their mother, it's because she was the more dominant one while they were making love. And the same goes for the father. So if the baby looks more like the father, it's because he was the more dominant one in the bedroom. And then he comments, of course, like, well, if the baby doesn't look like either parent, then they were equally dominant or equally not so. I laughed out loud when I read that part because he's got all sorts of wisdom in there. He also comments on Greek mythology and on, I think, the idea of paganism too. He says that there is no such thing as centaurs or chimeras. He also talks about how men died of a lack of food before. Now they die of overindulgence. I mean, that alone is so relatable to society. Like the fact that we just have everything at our disposal and so much of it, right? And how privileged we are, especially in the Western world. So, just very, very interesting comments throughout. Like, I'm just picking out the ones that I found especially interesting that jumped out at me, but it's packed with these kinds of observations. Lucretius also talks about wealth, but also wealth in terms of like what does wealth mean? And for him, he says the greatest wealth is living modestly. So if you're modest, that's the way to live. That's the best way to live. You should be content with little. You don't need excess. And the book ends with a description of the plague that occurred in Athens in 430 BC that killed approximately 100,000 people. They were fighting Sparta at that time and were besieged, and so yeah, it was terrible. So he ends it with that, a very descriptive account of the plague and what the plague did to people. It kind of ends it on the note of, there was no water, so people were drowning in their own saliva and, all sorts of other things related to plague. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. But I found it a very, very interesting read. Like I mentioned before, it's a classic and still relevant to today, which is really cool. So if you found anything I've said interesting, as always, pick yourself up a copy of On the Nature of Things by Lucretius. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Also, like and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time.